Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to Synchronicity University. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. And this is your moment of synchronicity. This is your moment to learn more about astrology and our connection to everyone and everything. So this particular video is on Saturn in the astrology chart and the Saturn return. So let me start off by talking about Saturn as a symbol in the chart, what it symbolizes. Notoriously, Saturn is said to be the part of the chart that is the Achilles heel. Well, what I have found is it actually isn't so much about what it is that feels vulnerable or feels like a wound. Yes, there is a measure of insecurity that's there. But ultimately what Saturn is saying by transit or in an astrology chart, but if we just look at where it is in an astrology chart, it is saying that this is an area of life where you can get as much as you give. And this is an area of life where if you honor it, if you honor the reality of what is in this part of life, if you honor the reality of using this energy as exemplified in the sign responsibly, you can manifest really just about anything you are willing to work towards. And that really is key. Saturn is ultimately, and the lesson of Saturn is that we are incarnated beings. Now in spiritual circles, there's this very sort of common phrase that people like to say, and that is we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Well, yes, that may be true, and that is true, right? We are spiritual beings, and that's what Jupiter's about, and even Neptune's about. Neptune and Jupiter say we are spiritual beings, and that's first and foremost. Well, Saturn says, look, yes, we're spiritual beings, that's awesome, but we're not just spirit having a human experience, but it's an integrated process where spirit is infused with matter and they're working together. And look to what is happening on a level of matter to inform what's happening on a level of spirit. But at the end of the day, focus on the matter if you want the matter to adjust, to change, to evolve. The thing with Saturn also is that it acknowledges that because we're incarnated on this earth, we are here to actually honor the rules of this realm, to honor the purpose of the incarnation. Instead of just saying we're going to escape it and be in spirit, right? Because that's the reality, that's what really matters. Saturn says, no, well, actually, you're here right now for a reason, and you're here to actually do something with your life, to actually walk your talk, not just live in a level of saying that, oh, all is well and good because I believe all in well and good. That's true, right? You can have that reality while simultaneously acknowledging that it's one thing to say all is well and good. It's another thing to live according to that belief. It's another thing to live according to that certainty, to make decisions from that place of certainty and to actually trust that if you put in the effort, the universe must respond in kind, that there are laws that govern this physical realm. And if you honor those and you live in an integrated way, you can manifest whatever it is that you're willing to give your energy towards in the form of practical energy as well. Wherever Saturn is in a chart, yes, it is an area of life, as I said, that we feel vulnerable, but ultimately what it's saying is, look, there's a part of you that feels you want more from this area of life. And because of that, the universe is going to say to you, you've got to earn it. You've got to work for it. And because of that, and because that is melded with the desire to have more and maybe the desire to feel that you need more, whether psychologically or personally or practically or otherwise, you're willing to actually back that up with action and therefore reap results. So for example, I mean, Saturn, normally they say, you know, it's notoriously limitation. But I have found that actually not to be true. Now, all else being equal, okay? If you're looking in the astrology chart and you've got a Saturn that is what astrologers might call, it's not a great word, I don't really like using it because I really believe that everything in the chart is there exactly as it needs to be so that you can have the experiences you need, have the internal tools you need to fully manifest your potential, to fully manifest what it is that you are here to, what you were created to do actually in this life. And the chart provides us with a glimpse of that. But having said that, what to me is very interesting is Wherever Saturn is in the chart ultimately can be a place of wonderful manifestations, but it does require that you not only give, but that you also trust a process as well. And because it feels like an area where you can't do enough, you're not getting enough as much as you want to be getting back, still you're willing to do more. Now, here's the thing. To go back to the phrase I was going to use, some people use this, traditionally it's been used, and the phrase is afflicted. Okay, so what that means is if your Saturn has lots of hard aspects playing out to it in your chart, okay, so again, all else being equal, now we're just sort of getting a general sense of that Saturn. So you look at Saturn in your chart, you see it's there, and you're like, okay, you recognize it's in this part of the sky, let's say it's in a certain house. So in that area of life, you know you're going to have to give if you want to get anything, and you feel that you want to get something. Okay. The energy is how you actually go about doing what you need to do to get back what it is that you desire to manifest. And how you feel about that might not always feel easy, but you're willing to engage it. You understand that's what you need to develop. Okay. Now, look at how that Saturn is speaking to other planets in the chart. If that Saturn is having lots of squares, maybe even oppositions as well. Oppositions really can go either way, but I have found because they tend to play themselves out in relationships, it's almost as if we project what it is ultimately that we need more of. Sometimes that projection comes on in ways that don't always feel comfortable, right? Of course, again, all else being equal, if you've got an opposition but lots of positive, harmonious aspects happening to both planets in that opposition, that is negated considerably. Any kind of sort of difficulty or hardness of an opposition tends to be negated significantly. So let's say you've got a Saturn with lots of hard aspects. Well, that says a lot about how you feel and how you go about honoring that Saturn. So somebody with Saturn with a lot of hard aspects and oppositions and squares all around is going to feel like they really have to do a lot of work and they really have to fight to manifest. That it might feel sometimes that other people, they want other people to help, but they're not really sure how they feel about getting other people to help. That's the opposition. And they may also feel sometimes that their experiences with others are limiting in some way, okay, or holding them back in some way as well, where it comes to fully developing what that Saturn is about in that area of life. Okay, somebody with Saturn making lots of easy aspects, okay, making lots of trines, let's say, sextiles, trines all around. This is a person who's going to be able to tap into that Saturn that much more easily. They're going to own their Saturnian energy. They're going to understand, have an easier understanding of how to do the right thing. So trines to Saturn mean that you have an easy understanding of how to do the right, responsible, mature thing to ultimately manifest as part of a bigger picture. So you have an easy way of doing that. If it's a sextile, it's more that you recognize if you do it, you'll be better. And so you're like, okay, if I do this in some way, I'll actually grow. I'll be able to hone my talent. You can see the benefit of being mature and you get to make that choice. If it's a square, it might feel like you have to fight, whether internally or externally. It might feel like there's tension, that there's a measure of resistance or struggle to overcome the limitations. But ultimately, that is when that Saturn is really able to get that much stronger. I mean, people sometimes say, oh no, squares, but I think squares are possibly one of the aspects in the chart that really speak to how much does this person actually do in their life. Because somebody who has lots of trines, if I see a chart and it's all grand trines, I get a little worried. Because I think, okay, this is a person who's just going to coast along through life. They think everything's great. And that's great. That must be a good way to live. But it's the people with squares that really tend to accomplish a lot in the world because they actually do the work, because they feel like there's more that needs to be done. And we see this again and again with people who are highly accomplished, who really had to, whether it's sacrifice or struggle or dedicate themselves. You will see squares to Saturn in these types of people. So we have Saturn there. Depending on how it's aspected, how it's speaking to the rest of the chart, will say something as to how readily you're able to access that energy, how readily you're able to appreciate what is tried and true and stick the course, like stay to that course, stay true to the course. Now, the Saturn return. This is always very exciting to me. And the reason is because normally with the Saturn return, like if you think about your own journey in astrology, right? If you're watching this, you're a student of astrology. The thing is, you're always a student of astrology. And some people just undertake that process more consciously than others. The fact that you're watching a video about learning more about what's happening in your chart means that you are consciously undertaking that process. But we all are connected to everyone and everything, including the sky. We're all students of astrology. Some people more conscious of that. Some people delve into it more advanced in that, dedicate their lives to that. Some people, you know, they just learn a little bit. They pick it up here and there throughout their lifetime. So normally what happens as part of learning astrology is first you start reading horoscopes, right? And you're like, wow, this really connects. Something about this makes sense to me. It really resonates. Then you start learning a little bit about the symbols. You learn about Mercury retrograde, right? That's the big one. You learn about Mercury retrograde. You go, oh my God, Mercury retrograde. Yeah, that's right. My computer always does this. And, you know, my things get lost and stuff. It makes so much sense. So you start to connect on that level. Then you start going to charts. And when you start going to charts and you look at cycles in life, one of the first things that people start looking at in terms of major cycles that a person goes through is the Saturn return. Now, the Saturn return happens once every 28 and a half years or so, but basically you start experiencing it sort of at 27, let's say the first Saturn return. The first Saturn return happens right around 27. You start feeling it as you turn, after you turn 27, it peaks. Usually right around the time that you are 28 and a half or 29, depending on when you're born, because the cycles can be off just a little bit depending on, it's never exact, right? Like it's sort of like, to take a little side road here, what happens with the planets is they don't sort of perfectly go around the zodiac and walk exactly the same path every time they go around the zodiac. Rather, the planets, while they do go around the zodiac, meaning they do go around the sun, ultimately what they do is they play out a larger pattern that takes place over many years. And the same is true for Saturn, which takes place over centuries, where they slowly but surely, yes, they go around again and again, but they do so just imperfectly enough to create basically a mandala. So they're walking a mandala in the sky slowly but surely over the course of many years as part of these larger cycles that are playing out. So because of this, it isn't that every 28 and a half years on the dot, you are going to have your Saturn return. It will vary depending on the person, depending on exactly where Saturn is as part of this larger cycle. But it's very easy to find out. You look at your chart, you see where your Saturn is, you look at where Saturn is now, and you get a pretty good idea. But look, you turn 27, you'll start feeling it. 28, 29, it's peaking. You turn 30 and it's done. You know it's done. The energy changes. Depending on the system of astrology, the chart emphasis might change. The numerological emphasis changes as well. So 30 does represent that moment when, astrologically speaking, you enter adulthood. So the Saturn return is the transition into adulthood. And what the Saturn return is going to do ultimately, just as it sounds, is Saturn will return to where it was when you were born. And as Saturn does this, ultimately what this is about is you getting real with yourself and owning that Saturn, taking an honest evaluation of if you've been honoring your Saturn or not. Where you have been honoring your Saturn, this can be a time of some wonderful progress. I mean, I've seen people who had really positive aspects happening in their natal chart with Saturn. They have a very positively aspected Saturn. These times, the Saturn return is a time of great accomplishment, of great breakthrough. It's a time when they really find themselves dedicated and able to bring forward their very best and manifest something that they're really proud of, and manifest something that ultimately forms a bedrock from which they can grow even more, really for the coming 30 years, the coming 27 to 30 years. So it can be an amazing time. A lot depends on how that Saturn is aspected. Also, a lot depends on what else is happening in your chart as well. So for example, you might have an amazing Saturn. So again, all else being equal, right? You might have an amazing Saturn. That's awesome. positively aspected. You're having your Saturn return. It's doing good things. But at the same time, you're going through a really tough transit of, let's say, Pluto conjunct your moon. Pluto's conjunct your moon, and while Pluto's conjunct your moon, Uranus is squaring that moon, and your natal moon is in really tough aspects to all different power players in the sky. Well, you put that together, and that moon is going to end up being more dominant. But because you're having a positive Saturn return, it says that you have that sense of detachment. You have that ability to see how, okay, yes, emotionally, it might be really hard right now. That's the moon. The moon is your emotions. You might be having an emotional rebirth that hurts like heck, but you're having a positive Saturn return. So that is saying that you know what you need to do, and you have an eye to the future. You have an eye to the big picture. You have an understanding that yes, emotionally it's hard right now, but it won't stay that way. And there actually are things you can do to empower yourself. And that's a big part of Saturn as well, is about empowering yourself through tangible action, knowing that they will manifest. So even though you might feel very rocked and your faith and your heart might be very rocked, that Saturn return ultimately is working very much to your advantage. Now let's take it the other way, right? Some people infamously, right? Or, you know, sometimes we know people personally who have really, really tough Saturn returns. Well, that is because they tend to be people who were not necessarily owning their Saturn, didn't have a healthy relationship with their Saturn, maybe were resisting what Saturn was trying to say to them. And so when Saturn does come along, let's say it's, you know, in your natal charts having all kinds of hard aspects to different power players in the sky, in your sky, Saturn comes along, you have your Saturn return, and it is just reality. It's a wake-up call, a big-time wake-up call. And it can feel really big. It can feel really consequential. And it is. It's a moment of honesty, of stark honesty with yourself as to where you are. Now, depending on how that Saturn is placed as well, you know, if it's speaking to things like the sun, if it's speaking to the moon, you want to just be really kind and gentle to yourself. Because if you have, look, a square of Saturn to your sun or moon, or even your Venus for that matter, or even your Mars for that matter, any of the personal planets, it tends to be a difficult time. It tends to be a time when you feel like you can't get what you want, when there's a lot of pressure, when you're feeling tired, you might be feeling very limited, might be feeling very frustrated. So if you have one of these planets in square to your natal Saturn, having your Saturn return means that that is being amplified, right? Now it's a cycle, it's going to pass. And especially with Saturn, you know it's going to pass. It's just literally a matter of a few months. Usually Saturn kind of peaks over a period of, makes its 3 conjunctions. If it's going to make 3 conjunctions, sometimes it'll only make 1, but if it's going to make 3 return conjunctions, it'll normally make that over a period of about 7 months or so, okay? So you know it's a time that's just going to pass. So you have to, one of the lessons with that is be gentle with yourself, be kind with yourself, make sure you are sleeping well, eating well, and you have the support that you need. But the time will pass, okay? One very famous example, if I may say, is of a Saturn return that was particularly difficult for someone was Kurt Cobain. So Kurt Cobain, that's a chart that a lot of astrologers we've talked about in relation to the Saturn return. I remember when it happened, astrologers started talking about it immediately because basically he had tremendous talent in his chart, right? And he had this very dreamy quality, an ideal quality, and that's what made him a good musician. But also what was interesting was that he really believed, looking at his chart from an astrological perspective, he really believed that gaining success would bring this elation, emotional elation. And it didn't do that because that's not what fame does, right? Fame, like they say, fame, success, money, whatever it is, ultimately it just amplifies the reality. It doesn't really like change your reality, right? The reality starts from within you. And so he had expected this, you know, magic dust bomb to come and just heal his whole life with the success. He had that expectation when you look at his chart. And this is why, because he had that connection, that belief, that feeling, He can channel it. He did channel it to make music that really spoke to a lot of people. But reality wasn't that. That wasn't the reality, right? That's not how reality works. And so when reality came, when fame came, and he realized his Saturn return happened, and he realized, look, this is the reality of the situation. You can't, you're thinking that this is going to be the bomb, but you can't escape yourself. So now what are you going to do to grow up, right? Now, I don't want to simplify it, because I do want to say that I think that mental health issues are complicated and people deserve our utmost compassion. But we do see people, when they go through cycles that are depressive, that feel very limiting, very challenging, when they go through cycles where they feel like it's really hard to have hope, where they feel very let down by life, it can be Saturn that is indicating this. And so whether it's you that's going through this or someone else you know, one really great thing is that we can look to Saturn and we can say, okay, yes, you're going through this. Yes, it sucks, okay? But it's not going to last. It will be over. You will get past this time. But also, we can give them tangible things to do, actions to take. And sometimes that action is medical help, because Saturn is what is established. Saturn is sort of also the ruler of, while Jupiter is the ruler of like sort of medicine and the philosophy of medicine, right? And Neptune especially rules hospitals, and they say that it rules like, you know, the Hippocratic Oath and things like that. Saturn is the establishment. Saturn to me is like when you go to the expert. Like you've gone, you've had your, you know, you've had your meditation treatments, you've done your alternative health treatments, you've been trying to figure it out. Now you're like, okay, something's wrong. I got to go to the guy who's been doing treatments for 50 years in, you know, the biggest hospital in, you know, the major city. Like this is about the Western established medicine, the system of medicine, whatever you think about it, this ultimately is Saturn. And so when I see someone going through a tough Saturn transit and I see that there's some depressive quality there, it's not bad to say to this person, and I know that some people, they really resist it, but in a case like that, it's not bad to say to a person, you know, it's okay to get some medical help right about now if you need it. Like to give them that permission, to give yourself that permission, because we know so many people, like collectively, we've had so many celebrated people who've committed suicide, who've gone through really tough Saturn transits, and you know, if they had gotten some medical treatment, maybe they would still be with us, blessing our lives, blessing the lives of the people that they love as well. So there's a certain responsibility there when you look at the chart for another person, to be measured, to be wise, to give them things to do, and to give them sort of hope ultimately, knowing that if they're having a tough Saturn transit, that it has its purpose, it has its point. And I will say that I have met many people who've had really, really tough Saturn transits, and on the other side of it, they've really found themselves in a much, much better place. But they had to go through that really challenging time in order to get there. They had to go through a time where they had to be honest with themselves, where they were kidding themselves, they were lying to themselves, they weren't being true to themselves, they had disappointment, they were trying to run from something deeper, they were going for something for all the wrong reasons, they were living a life that was unfulfilling. These are the things that Saturn return is going to try to get you honest with, if that is the case in your life. And if you take Saturn up on the offer, then it can be a tremendous time of self-honesty and also a lot of personal growth as well. So Saturn return is not something to fear. It needn't necessarily be hard. If you're having other positive transits in the chart, amplify those, go to those. But the best thing you can do with Saturn is you do your best and you surrender the rest. You take action that's in front of you to do, and you turn over the rest, trusting that on the other side there will be rewards. And with Saturn, because Saturn makes you earn it, with Saturn there are always, always rewards. Now, wherever Saturn is in your chart, if you're having your Saturn return, that area of life is going to be amplified. That energy of the sign is going to be amplified as well. You're going to have to get real where you've been responsible or irresponsible with the energy of that sign as part of lifting that energy, which ultimately will help you use it to your advantage, which ultimately, and what ultimately Saturn is self-respect. It's walking your talk. That's the lesson. The more readily able and readily willing you are to take Saturn up on that option, the more easier you'll find that time to be. Well, thank you so much for watching this introduction to Saturn. As part of this series, I'm going to be going through Saturn through the sky. Yay! Saturn through the chart, through the houses, and through the signs, coming up as part of this series. I absolutely love your interactions. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com, and the YouTube comments as well. Truly so grateful for it. Love our interactions. Until we connect again, take care. Thank you for watching this lesson as part of Synchronicity University. You can go online at synchronicityuniversity.com or click on your screen if you're on YouTube right now to access even more video lessons, to access horoscopes, interviews with some of the most amazing astrologers in the world, and so much more.